Hey everybody, welcome back to All Fiction is Fantasy. Daniel here. I hope you're doing well, and if you're not, I hope you are soon. Okay, in this video we are doing a reading roundup, and I guess a book roundup. We'll talk about some of the books I've been reading in the last few months, and a lot of the books that I have been buying. So this is a combined kind of multi-book review video and a book haul video. Let's start with the stuff that I've been reading, and just recently I did finish the first novel in the second Titus Crow trilogy from Brian Lumley, and that is Spawn of the Winds. And the second trilogy is comprised of Spawn of the Winds in the Moons of Borea and Elysia. So I am a very huge fan of the first three Titus Crow books. I think they're absolutely amazing. Some of my favorite books. I just think they are so much fun. They're so inventive and creative and wild. And I was pretty disappointed with Spawn of the Winds. It's not terrible. It's a pretty good kind of adventure story, but the setting is really, really boring. It's all set in a ice and snow covered landscape that is just so uninteresting. And one of my favorite things about the first three Titus Crow books is the inventive setting, and it's always changing, and it's this huge kind of cosmic romp that starts on Earth and blasts off into weird cosmic areas. And I found that the kind of single setting of the Spawn of the Winds just wasn't very interesting. As a matter of fact, Titus Crow and Henri, they're not even, Henri Laurent de Marny, they're not even in this first volume. I believe they come in the second and third volumes of this second trilogy. But the first one focuses on a new character, and they are taking the battle to Ithaca and the Children of the Wind. So some of the fight scenes are pretty good. There's a big standoff towards the end that is pretty exciting. Lumley really knows how to write a conclusion, and his epic finales are always awesome, and that was surely the case in Spawn of the Winds. And I did like a lot of the characters were Native Americans from different tribes from North America and Canada. And I thought that was super interesting, and I did like that. But I just found the setting to be not so interesting, and I wasn't a big fan of the main character. So I will most likely finish the other two in the Moons of Borea and Elysia, but I'm not exactly excited to get to those. So that is a pretty big disappointment after how much I have always loved the first three Titus Crow novels. I've also been reading something that I never thought in a million years that I would be reading, and that is some Star Trek novels. So I recently got back into Deep Space Nine, and Deep Space Nine, I'm not a huge fan of Star Trek, but I am a huge fan of Deep Space Nine. Deep Space Nine might be my favorite science fiction thing of all time, and I've never really read any Star Trek novels before. And so I bought a whole bunch of Star Trek Deep Space Nine novels. Now, I don't have those out on the table because I bought like 20 of them, and the covers are really boring. It's definitely nothing to look at. But I read two Deep Space Nine novels. I read the first novel, and that is a novelization of the first series. So it is based off of the screenplay for Emissary, and I really enjoyed it. It focuses on some of the characters in a little more detail because you get some of their thoughts and more of their internal voices and their internal motivations. So I really did enjoy that. And my favorite thing about Deep Space Nine is the cast of characters. It's such an eclectic cast of characters, and they're all incredibly interesting and multidimensional. And that's why I like Deep Space Nine so much. And then I also read the second novel, and this is the first of the original stories. So this was not based off of an episode, and that is called The Siege. And it's about a shape-shifting serial killer who is loose on Deep Space Nine. It was pretty good. It was interesting. It focuses on Odo a lot, and there is this religious faction. That's another thing that I like about Deep Space Nine is how much it focuses on the religion of the Gamma Quadrant and that area. I find that incredibly interesting. So that part of the siege was pretty good. This is by Peter David, and Peter David has done some comic book work. I think he did a pretty popular run on The Incredible Hulk. One thing that shocked me about the siege was how violent it was. The shape-shifting serial killer can change his limbs into multiple weapons, and he changes his arm into a giant hammer and just smashes the crap out of a dude's head, and there's blood and brains everywhere. It goes really hard in the violence, and I was surprised at that. But over the next couple of years, I will be reading more Deep Space Nine novels. And yeah, if you told me 20, 30 years ago that I would be reading Star Trek novels, I would have said you were crazy. But hey, here I am. I no longer really care about, I used to think, oh, I'm not going to read Star Trek. I'm above that. Nope, I'm not above that because it's interesting and I like it. And then I've also been reading a whole bunch of mythos fiction. I read most of the Book of Eibon. And so this has got to be one of the most interesting of the Chaosium mythos collections. So this is put together like the esoteric book and like one of those ancient tomes that you might find in a mythos story. And it has spells and it has weird runes and different types of things in it, and different summoning things and summoning circles and seals and all kinds of stuff. And this is kind of written as a history of Eibon. And this focuses on a bunch of stories from Clark Ashton Smith and other authors, John Foltz, which we'll talk about in more detail a little later. Some stories from Michael Sisko, one of my favorites. Love Michael Sisko. Clark Ashton Smith, Richard L. Tierney. We'll talk a little bit more about Richard L. Tierney. But yeah, the Book of Eibon. This is a really interesting book. I think it's super cool how it was all put together. And I've read about half of it, and I'm kind of picking at it. When I read collections of short stories, I rarely read them from cover to cover. I'm kind of a grazer of short stories. I'll pick up a book, read a few short stories, put it down, and then maybe switch to something else. So I've been doing that with a lot of these books I've been reading. I'm reading a whole bunch of books based off of the Dunwich cycle and the great old ones that are found in the Dunwich expansion for Arkham Horror 2nd edition. And so there are a number of different great old ones in that expansion. I've been reading stories on both of those for my upcoming video for the Dunwich expansion. So right now I am rereading the Dunwich Horror. I haven't read that in a long time, and it's pretty interesting. A good work of folk horror. And as a matter of fact, this particular volume from Chaosium does open up with a few Arthur Machen stories. So The Great God Pan, such a classic of folk horror, and also The White People from Arthur Machen. So this is a pretty good collection, and it's been a very long time since I've read the Dunwich Horror, and I am liking it quite a bit. I also picked up here, Glocky is one of the great old ones in the Dunwich expansion. So of course, Glocky is a great old one created by Ramsey Campbell. Ramsey Campbell is an author who I just don't get along with. I don't like his writing style. I keep trying, but I keep bouncing off of him. And I bounced off of his original Glocky story in here. But the one that I really, really liked in here, I thought it was amazing, was Mirror Fishing by John Langan. And John Langan, of course, most famously the author of The Fisherman. And I recently picked up, we'll take a look at that, take a look at those. I picked up a couple short story collections from Langan. But that story was amazing, and a few of the other stories I read in here were really good. This is from Dark Regions Press. So this is a pretty good collection that I've been picking my way through. Some friends of mine and I together, we read the first volume of this trilogy here, and that is Crypt of the Moon Spider from Nathan Ballingrud. And this is a novella, barely a novella. More, I don't know, I guess it's a 100-page novella. It kind of reads more like a short story. It's really fast-paced, and it's interesting. I didn't love it, but I liked it enough to continue with the trilogy. And I like that it is so short. You can read this in just a day or two. And it's part of the Lunar Gothic trilogy. And so this is a book kind of about an insane asylum on the moon. And there are this weird moon cult, these alabaster priests who are unearthing this weird kind of cosmic spider on the moon. So a really cool setting, an inventive setting. The story was okay, and some of the characters were a little one note, but overall the mood, the atmosphere, and the vibe was pretty good. And so it's going to keep me reading this trilogy. I also read through Sorcery Against Caesar from Richard L. Tierney. So this is more of his biblical stories mixed with Cthulhu mythos. And this focuses on Simon of Gita. And man, this book is just overflowing with awesome stories. And some of the stories in here are also were written by Robert M. Price. And a few of those are excellent, or a couple of those were just excellent. But The Worms of Urakus, somebody recommended that story to me recently on the channel, and I loved it. But yeah, I liked just about every single story in here. Some of my favorite Mythos stories. I am a huge fan now of Richard L. Tierney. And of course, I think we did talk about this recently or a while ago, but the Yog-Sothoth cycle edited by Robert M. Price. This contains two very, very hard to find Tierney novels and novellas, and both of these coupled together to create this kind of biblical take on the Cthulhu mythos. I just can't get enough of Tierney. I love his style, and I like how he connects so many different dots. So I have been greatly, greatly enjoying these, and I can wholeheartedly recommend Sorcery Against Caesar. One of the best books I read in 2024. Just fantastic. I'm also reading through Michael Shea's collection of Cthulhu Mythos stories, Demiurge, and the one that I'm focusing on for the Arkham Horror video will be the Sathugwa. And so I'm also reading through the Sathugwa cycle here. Really cool, a great old one created by Clark Ashton Smith, and some interesting stories here. Michael Shea's prose style is great. I love his descriptions. I love his imagination. It's so interesting and evocative. So this is a great collection here. I think a little hard to find now. And the Sathugwa cycle, this was very good. A lot of Clark Ashton Smith stories. Clark Ashton Smith, I'm kind of hit or miss with. Sometimes I find his style to be a little too impenetrable, but sometimes I totally get along with him. And a few of his stories in here I really liked. The one that I really, really loved, I think was in the Book of Ibon. And man, which one was that? Something about Saturn. What was that called? The Door to Saturn. The Door to Saturn by Clark Ashton Smith was amazing. I loved it. That might be one of my favorite Clark Ashton Smith stories. Now, in the Sathugwa cycle, they did mention an author by the name of Gary Myers. And Gary Myers is a blind spot for me. I had never read him, but I liked the story in the Sathugwa cycle. And so I ended up buying a couple of his print-on-demand books because he seems to be one of the earlier Cthulhu authors who has kind of been forgotten by time. And I don't really read or hear a lot of people talking about Gary Myers. As a matter of fact, it's pretty hard to find his books except for in these kind of boring-looking print-on-demand versions from Amazon. And so I am greatly, greatly looking forward to reading more Gary Myers. And I would like to find some more attractive versions of his books because these things are they're pretty ugly. I mean, what is this cover? The Country of the Worm. That's a great title. Excursions Beyond the Wall of Sleep. That's awesome. But yeah, there's just really nothing exciting about this book at all from the way it looks. But I'm looking forward to reading more of Gary Myers. Okay, so those are some of the highlights of some of the books I've been reading over the last few months. And now on to a lot of the books I've been buying. So I think the last video I did was a video two videos ago before the Night in the Lonesome October, but that was Darrell Schweitzer's We Are All Legends. Just amazing. God, what a masterful work of fantasy. I cannot praise this book enough. Blew my mind. I will never be the same after having read this book. But I mentioned in that video that because I loved this book so much, I went to Schweitzer's eBay store and bought a whole mess of other books that he wrote. And now we're going to take a look at that stack. So I bought Exploring Fantasy Worlds. So this is an edited collection, a collection that Schweitzer edited. All essays on fantastic literature written by Michael Moorcock, Sandra Meisel, Darrell Schweitzer, L. Sprague de Camp, Paul Anderson, Fritz Lieber, David K. Heller, Ben Endick, and Paul Spencer. So just a collection of essays about fantasy, a collection of essays about Lovecraft. And this is actually illustrated by Richard Huber. So this is edited by Darrell Schweitzer. So just a whole bunch of essays about Lovecraft and Lovecraftian fiction. These are pretty cool. So these are hymns, kind of parody hymns that Darrell Schweitzer wrote. This is the Innsmouth Tabernacle Choir hymnal by Brother Darrell Schweitzer and the Second Innsmouth Tabernacle Choir. And so these are parodies based off of old hymns, and they're all about great old ones, and they're illustrated. So I thought these were a lot of fun. Darrell Schweitzer does seem, yeah, Brother Darrell Schweitzer. Yeah, he signs all of the books that you buy from his eBay store. So these are a lot of fun. Here we have the Arkham Alphabet Book for Children by Darrell Schweitzer. And so this is just kind of a funny alphabet book all about the great old ones. A is for Arkham, B for the book, a curious fool from the library took. D for the demon, which filled him with dread. Eldritch, of course, it bit off its head. So yeah, I was kind of surprised at the the sense of humor that Darrell Schweitzer has in a lot of his stuff. The Pratfall of Cthulhu and Other Literary Mishaps. These are Cthulhu-based limericks. So if you want to read some Cthulhu limericks, you might want to check this out. But then we get into some more of his serious works here. So another collection of short stories, Refugees from an Imaginary Country. And of course, a lot of these have art by Stephen Fabian. So he seemed to work with Stephen Fabian quite often. And I mean, I have no complaints about that because Stephen Fabian is one of the all-time great artists. The White Isle by Darrell Schweitzer. I believe this was his first novel. Another one with art by Stephen Fabian. So we have Transients and Other Disquieting Stories. This is the one I'm really looking forward to reading. This is a biography that Schweitzer wrote on Lord Dunsany, or Lord Dunsany, I should say. So that is called Pathways to Elfland, The Writings of Lord Dunsany. Here we have another novel by Schweitzer called The Shattered Goddess. And here we have another collection of short stories with art by Stephen Fabian, and that is Tom O'Bedlam's Night Out. Now, what's interesting, after I did my video on We Are All Legends, a close friend of Darrell Schweitzer contacted me, and that person was John Foltz. And lo and behold, I have some short stories. I had already have some short stories in my collection from John Foltz, but his was a name that just didn't ring any bells. But it turns out I have read some of his stuff, and I didn't let him know that, but he contacted me and he wanted to send me a couple of his sword and sorcery novels. So he sent me two books here, Immaculate Scoundrels and Times Never Change. And I read one story recently by Foltz, and man, I can't remember what it was, but it was great. And so I am really looking forward to this. And John, if you watch this, thank you so much for contacting me. It was really cool. Darrell Schweitzer's a little older, and so he's not very net savvy. And he was turned on to my video, and he was just ecstatic. John told me he was so happy with the way I covered We Are All Legends. And he told John to tell me thank you from the bottom of his heart for making that video. So man, that's really cool. I love that. I love covering these kinds of authors who, you know, are somewhat successful, but maybe not super popular, because you get that kind of interaction. So yeah, I'm looking forward to reading these. I think they sound pretty cool. Let me put this Darrell Schweitzer and John Foltz stack to the side here. Let's see. Now, these stacks are just kind of in a weird random order, but I did go to a used bookstore with some friends. Actually, all of these are from used bookstores, I believe. And one thing I found, and this was so interesting. So this is an old collection of the Elec of Atlantis stories from Henry Kuttner with illustrations by Brad W. Foster. So I'm a pretty big fan of Elec of Atlantis. I like Kuttner's stuff. I like his sword and sorcery stuff and his Cthulhu stuff. And I had never seen this particular version before, but this is from Griffin Books. Now, what's interesting about Griffin Books is there is a guy on YouTube, and I absolutely love him. He has my favorite book channel, and his name is Gary Lovisi. Turns out Griffin Books is his publication. I had no idea. And I opened this up and saw Gary Lovisi's name in here, and Gary Lovisi actually also writes the introduction. And I was so happy to find this just because of how much I like Gary's YouTube channel. So yeah, Gary Lovisi wrote the introduction here. And man, this thing is just like hand-typed, super DIY collection of the Elec stories. I've read or I own all the Elec stories in various other versions, but I had to pick this up just because of that connection to Gary Lovisi. I know Gary sometimes does watch my videos, and so Gary, if you see this, man, this is awesome. I'm so glad to have this connection to you now. And I had no idea that you had published stuff like this before. At that same bookstore, I also picked up this somewhat newer version of Sheridan Le Fanu's Carmilla, a very early vampire novel. It has a lesbian vampire relationship. I've always wanted to read Carmilla, and I never have. I picked this up because of the illustrations. And it's just a really nice version of Carmilla. A lot of times, these old stories are, kind of maybe in public domain, and so you get these like really cheap kind of Dover paperbacks with really bad paper that you can see through. But this is a really beautifully illustrated, and I think this also has footnotes and some introductions, so a really nice copy of Carmilla, and I am looking forward to reading that. Everything I've read from Le Fanu so far has been great. Their story, The Drunkard's Dream, is one of my favorite short stories of all time. And then I did pick up a few Warhammer novels. So I do have Hollowed Ground by Richard Strachan. This is an Age of Sigmar novel. I picked up The Black-Eyed Saint by Dale Lucas. This is Dale Lucas, I should say. This is a Warhammer horror novel. And I finally got the paperback version for Cursed City from C.L. Werner. So looking forward to reading those. I have been reading a little bit of Warhammer. I have two friends who have gone super hardcore into Warhammer novels, and they're reading all the 40K stuff. And it's so funny because they are not fans of the game at all. They really haven't even played the game, but they love the Dan Abnett stuff. And here I am having played the games for many years, and I've barely read any of the novels. So it's been this weird kind of exchange there. I did pick up the final book from Mark Samuels. He died this year, I believe, and he is an author who I just recently found out about after he died, based off of Matthew M. Bartlett on his Facebook channel. So this last novel, Charnel Glamour, this is actually put out by a small press from Lithuania, Kairopetra Press, and man, they are just putting out these gorgeous embossed books. Just, man, the quality of this book. I mean, it costs $60 new, but this thing is absolutely gorgeous. So I am so looking forward to reading this, and I'm hoping this was kind of a monetary investment. I think this book will probably be somewhat collectible, but it's a gorgeous book. I had to buy it. Even if I don't end up loving the stories because I never read them, it was a lot of money to spend on an author who I'm not sure of, but I wanted to support this small press. And I believe that this new Matthew M. Bartlett is also from that Lithuanian publisher here. And the small bookstore that I like to go to down south of Seattle carries a lot of their books. So this is the newest collection of short stories from Matthew M. Bartlett. So man, look at that cover, Vistas of Carrion. So very cool. All right, let me put those over to the side here. let's take a look at this stack here. So C.J. Henderson, The Occult Detectives, 13 Tales of Supernatural Investigation from the author of The Things That Are Not There. I also bought an illustrated, maybe kind of illustrated novel / comic book from C.J. Henderson that is based off of one of his occult detectives. And so before the X-Files, before Buffy, his tales of P.I. Teddy London were being read and enjoyed by fans around the world. Now, for the first time ever, the absolute best of his supernatural sleuthing tales have been brought together in one incredible collection. Join him in the pages of this fright-filled compilation as he furthers the careers of Lynn Carter's remarkable Anton Zarnak and H.P. Lovecraft's resilient Inspector Legras. So kind of a pulp detective noir meets Cthulhu mythos. I did pick up the first volume of Howard Andrew Jones's new sword and sorcery epic, The Lord of Shattered Land. I wish this was in mass market size. I'm not sure why it's not. I would have greatly preferred this in mass market size, but I'm looking forward to reading that. I'm not sure if the second volume is out in paperback yet. I need to check on that. I picked up another hard-to-find Brian McNaughton novel, and this is The House Across the Way. This sounds pretty interesting here. One morning, Gregor Samsa awoke to find that he was Sterling Fairchild. He slithered among the shadows of the underbrush on his belly. Two of the creatures clumped past him, tall, pale oblongs with grotesquely tiny mouths, flat faces, and round, protruding eyes. With their blind eyes, stinking mouths, clogged nostrils, pasty bodies, sprayed and swathed in disgusting substances, they sickened him. Yeah, this sounds like a really good read. And man, I love that cover. Who's that cover by? Does it say? I don't think it says. But jacket illustration by Jamie Oberschleck. So beautiful, beautiful cover. I love it. So here are those two John Langan short story collections I picked up. So that is Corpse Mouth and Other Autobiographies, and also Mr. Gaunt and Other Uneasy Encounters. So I love that mirror fishing story so much. It really got under my skin and creeped me out. So I'm looking forward to reading more John Langan. I've owned The Fisherman since it was new, and I still haven't gotten around to reading it. I did pick up the final Zothique cycle by Clark Ashton Smith. I have been getting more into Smith lately, and I think it's his Zothique stuff that really appeals to me. So I picked up this version here from Hippocampus Press. Really cool kind of psychedelic acid style cover. And then here is that other just really nondescript, boring, print-on-demand version of a Gary Myers short story collection from Amazon called Gray Magic, an episode of Ibon. So there's that Ibon connection. But I really need to find better versions of these Gary Myers books because I think I'm really, really going to like him. All right, let me make a little more room here. There's a lot of stuff to get through. This is going to be a long video. Let's check out this stack here. So anytime I'm at a used bookstore and I see Planet Stories, these were from, of course, I think these were actually from Paizo, and what is that called? Pathfinder, the Pathfinder publisher, when they were putting out their Planet Stories books, that they were kind of republishing all of this old pulp fiction that was fantastic. And I love their stuff so much, and it went out of print. So a lot of the Planet Stories books are getting harder and harder to find and getting more expensive. And so whenever I see them out, I try to buy them. And I bought a whole bunch of Gary Gygax's stuff. I've only read, I think, a Greyhawk novel from Gary Gygax. I haven't read a lot. I haven't heard a lot of good things, but I just try to get these Planet Story versions when I can. So I bought the Anubis Murders from Gary Gygax. Let's see, a couple more Gary Gygax here. The Infernal Sorceress from Gary Gygax and the Samarkand Solution. And then I also got these two Michael Moorcock Planet Stories, and that is The City of the Beast and Lord of the Spiders. I believe that these are kind of Edgar Rice Burroughs style, planetary romance style fiction. Not like Elric, but more like John Carter, that kind of thing. Or maybe The Ship of Ishtar. Maybe the only straight fiction in all of these, but I did find this Brodigan, An Unfortunate Woman. So I am, of course, falling in love with Richard Brodigan in Watermelon Sugar. Still, man, that novel needs to go into my top 10 of all time. Absolutely love in Watermelon Sugar. So I'm always looking forward to reading something that I've never read from Richard Brodigan. Now let's move into some Conan stuff. So I did find this copy of Conan and the Emerald Lotus by John C. Hawking, who recently published the sequel to, so this has been considered one of the all-time great Conan stories, and it's been hard to find for a long time. So now it is collected in with the new sequel that finally got published. And I think it's called City of the Dead. I can't exactly remember. I don't think I brought it out here, but I'm happy to own that. And then I got this one from Sean A. Moore, and that is the Grim Gray God. Both fantastic covers. And I've been buying a lot of these 90s versions of Conan. These 90s, I think I might have shown a couple of these before, but I do have them all in a stack. So when I can find these for less than, 15 bucks or something, I will buy them. They are getting harder and harder to find and more expensive, especially in this mass market size. So we have Conan and the Manhunters. We have Conan the Raider by Leonard Carpenter, and this was by John Maddox Roberts. Another one by Sean A. Moore, Conan the Hunter. Man, what a brilliant cover. I love it. And then some from Steve Perry, of course, the writer of the Matador trilogy. Or I guess it's 5 books now, or 6 or 7 books in the Matador series, starting with The Man Who Never Missed. Great kind of planetary pulp adventure. But Conan the Defiant, Conan the Fearless, Conan the Freelance, Conan the Formidable, and Conan the Indomitable. So that, I believe that completes the Conan side of this book haul, but that does not complete the Steve Perry side. Actually, there are a couple more Steve Perry books. We might have to take a look at those separately because I can't seem to find my others, but we'll start here. So I've been buying some of the Aliens novels and novelizations. I did already own the novel for Alien, written by Alan Dean Foster. So I completed that Alan Dean Foster Alien trilogy by picking up Aliens and Alien 3. So Aliens was one of the first Alan Dean Foster books I read. When this first came out, I was a little too young to see rated R movies in the theater, and so I had to get my fix from reading about them. So that was the way that I actually experienced Aliens before seeing the movie. And yeah, so both of these, so now I have all 3 of the original Alien novelizations from Foster. And then I also picked up by Steve Perry here, this Aliens trilogy. So we have Aliens, the Earth Hive, Book 1. We have Book 2, Nightmare Asylum, and Book 3, The Female War. So Steve Perry can be a really fun author. He's kind of hit or miss, but when he hits, I think he's pretty fun. And then I had no idea that Robert Sheckley had written a Alien. I love Robert Sheckley, his short stories. I have the complete short story collection from Sheckley from this really small boutique press, and it's one of my favorite things that I own. And it's pretty hard to find, and I ended up getting it for a really good deal because Half Price had it, and it was sitting on their shelves for a long time. And I made them an offer, and they took it. But this is Robert Sheckley's Aliens, Alien Harvest. So looking forward to reading more Alien stuff. Picked up a couple old Cthulhu things here. So I have The Case of Charles Dexter Ward, and that's an old version here by H.P. Lovecraft, and also The Lurker at the Threshold from, of course, from, what's his name? August Derleth. Man, August Derleth. My mind completely blanked. But yeah, so this is one of the things that he said, worked with H.P. Lovecraft. But it was mostly August Derleth. And as if you've watched this channel before, I'm a huge fan of Derleth. I respect him a lot. I don't mind what he did with the Cthulhu Mythos. I think it's kind of interesting. And I needed to read this for one of the episodes for my coverage of Arkham Horror 2nd Edition. Okay, here we have a trilogy by Adrian Cole, and that is the Dream Lords and the Lord of Nightmares and the Bane of Nightmares. I bought all of these based on the covers. I thought they looked really interesting. I thought they sounded really interesting. They said in the tradition of Tolkien and Lovecraft. Unfortunately, I started reading the first one and it wasn't very good. So I'm not sure if I'm ever actually going to read these or not, but I thought they looked interesting. And they just, back during the like 70s, they would throw Tolkien and Lovecraft's name on just about anything they could to get people like me, AKA suckers, to buy these things. And I bought them. I got them for cheap enough. I'm not disappointed that I own them because I think they look interesting. And as you guys know, book collecting, book buying, and book reading, those really are kind of three different hobbies. So I think these look cool. I don't know. I'm preserving them in my collection. This Frazetta cover for this Gardner F. Fox, the Warrior of Larn, I think looks amazing. Very different for Frazetta, kind of a different style than usual. But yeah, this looks pretty cool, an old Ace paperback. And then I did pick up this trilogy from David Gemmell. So we have The Waylander, The King Beyond the Gate, and Against the Horde. I believe I got all of these in a bulk on eBay. Volume 1, I think I showed those in reverse order. Volume 1, Volume 2, and Volume 3. So looking forward to reading those at some point in my life. Here we have a Richard A. Lupoff novel, The Sword of the Demon, kind of a Eastern take on sword and sorcery. I think it sounds kind of interesting. I believe my friend read this and he told me about it and he said it was pretty good. The Sword Dancer from Jennifer Robertson. So a female example of a sword and sorcery written by a woman. That's a little rare, so that's why I wanted to pick this up. I did pick up, so I think I've shown one of these before, but this is a trilogy that I finally completed from Duncan McGeary. And this is Snow Castles, Ice Towers, and Star Axe. So most of these were probably things that I bought because I thought the covers looked interesting, kind of bottom of the barrel sword and sorcery. But I think I'm getting to that point where everything sword and sorcery related that I am buying is from the bottom of the barrel. Probably this too here. So in the tradition of Conan. This is a Jeffrey Catherine Jones cover that I've seen used on like 3 different books. And this is Quest of the Dark Lady by Quinn Reed. The royal city was gripped by sadness and terror. Only Langax, good and wise emperor of the Iron Land, stood between civilization and the hideous, slimy creatures of the terrible East. And now Langax was dying, growing ever weaker as the magic spell cast upon him grew more powerful. Pretty cool illustrations, though. It's always nice to have illustrations in a book. I do like that. And then I did pick up both of these from Talbot Mundy. So I need to get, this is a whole series that I do need to get, kind of historical sword and sorcery, historical adventure. This early, I might have shown these. I can't remember when I bought these. They were in my stack to still show. So the 3-Ring Psychus from John Shirley. I'm a pretty big John Shirley fan. And another novelization from the king of novelizations, Alan Dean Foster, and that is for Starman. So I love Starman. It's one of my favorite John Carpenter movies. I think it's really good, and that could be a really fun read. Let's see, we have 3 more stacks of books here. Now this one I am so looking forward to reading. I'm not even sure how I heard about this. It might have just been on a random eBay search, but this is Interplanetary Hunter by Arthur K. Barnes. So this is kind of like a science fiction monster hunter. And what's really cool is in this book, there's actually a bestiary of the creatures that they are hunting across different planets. So they go on hunting expeditions on Venus, Jupiter, Neptune, a comet, and Saturn. And they find these various creatures and they catalog them. And it has some illustrations and a bestiary, things about the creatures, such as these rotary moles, native to Titan, about the size of a woodchuck, but quite round. Its mouth is set precisely in the center of its head, perfectly circular, and is armed with a formidable set of teeth. 2 tiny eyes are set in furry sockets. It has a number of little flippers set haphazardly all over its body. These lie flat when the mole is not in motion. They help spin it in a clockwise motion while its teeth chew away at rock and it bores into the ground at an amazing speed. Really, really cool. What an interesting idea for a book. I finally found the last book of Richard Paul Russo's trilogy that I was missing in mass market. So that's the Carlucci trilogy, and this is Destroying Angels. So now I have all three in mass market size. So really, really cool. I love this trilogy. One of my favorite works of cyberpunk. Speaking of cyberpunk, but not cyberpunk, we have two books from John Shirley that are definitely not cyberpunk, but his story, his novel, City Come a Walkin', is my favorite work of cyberpunk. And I got this one, I have no idea. Dracula in Love by John Shirley. Could be interesting. And also The Black Hole of Carcosa from John Shirley. And then a newer book here, and this is a book that my friend has been recommending to me for some time, and I found it out at a bookstore, and that is by Marcel Schwab, and that is called The King of the Golden Mask. And I've heard really great things about this. Wakefield Press, they put out these really, really nice paperback editions. And I get the sense that this is somewhat similar to something maybe like Thomas Ligotti or Robert W. Chambers or something. And my buddy swears by this book, so I am really looking forward to reading that. And let's see, we have some Neil Hancock here. I think 4 books by Neil Hancock. So I have The Fires of Windermere. You know, these were kind of 80s and 90s post-Tolkien style epic fantasy. The Circle of Light is probably Neil Hancock's most popular series. What is this here? The Sea of Silence by Neil Hancock and The Wanderer's Return. I believe this is a trilogy from Neil Hancock from Questar. And then Dragon Winter by Neil Hancock. I just love that cover. It looks like an adult, the Ballantine adult fantasy style. But really, really cool. I like his animal stories. I think they're interesting. And then, hey, we're back to Steve Perry. So a couple more of the Matador books. So I know there are at least 5 because I have the original trilogy. And then here we have the 97th Step and the Albino Knife. And my buddy's read all of these and he says they're really good. And I love that Matador trilogy. The Man Who Never Missed is just a stone cold space adventure classic. So good. A Thieves' World book from Janet Morris, Beyond Sanctuary. While I was out, I finally found this Avon version of A. Merritt's 7 Footprints to Satan. So I've got 3 or 4 different versions of this, but I've been wanting this cover for some time. So just a really cool kind of occult, satanic adventure story, aka Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, but 7 Steps to Satan. Man, just brilliant, brilliant cover there. I like this this style of this A. Merritt fiction. I like 2 newer works of sword and sorcery from D.J. Butler. So we have In a Palace of Shadow and Joy and Between Princesses and Other Jobs. And so these are focusing on Butler's characters Indrajit and Fix. And so this is a novel and this is a collection of short stories. I've never read Butler, but I've heard some good things. And so it's always nice to see new sword and sorcery, especially when it's published in mass market size. Guys, go back to this. Everybody start printing small mass market books again, please. This is the best way to read sword and sorcery. But I heard that these are in the kind of vein of Fafhrd and Grey Mouser. Another book written or edited by Darrell Schweitzer, and that is Cthulhu's Reign. So this is a collection of Cthulhu Mythos stories. And who do we have? We have Don Webb, Mike Allen, Ken Asamatsu, Will Murray, Matt Carradine, Darrell Schweitzer, John Foltz again, John Langan again, Jay Lake, Gregory Frost, Brian Stableford, Laird Barron, Brad Richard, A. Lupoff, and Fred Chappell. So a pretty cool little collection there. And then this trilogy here that I bought, and after I bought it, I thought it looked really interesting. And then I read about it, and I'm not sure. I heard there's a lot of like pretty brutal rape scenes in this. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. I think the covers look great, but this is Twilight of the Serpent, The Seed Bearers, and the Power of the Serpent. And these are by Peter Valentine Timlett. I love the covers. I love that it's kind of a shorter trilogy, but I've heard some of the subject matter can be pretty brutal. So I'm not sure about these. I'll give them a chance. And let's see, a few more books here, one more stack. Some really, really random things, I believe, over here. So we went to a used bookstore. My buddy and I went on a little road trip and went to a used bookstore. And so I just picked up some random things. I have no idea what this is. Some kind of a cyberpunk book by Jim Young called Armed Memory. I think it was like, it says $2.95, but I think it was like $1. It was on like the closeout bin or something, but I don't know. Thought it took a chance on it. Maybe I'll take a chance on it. This kind of paperback from hell looking thing, Shattered by John Peel. I just love that cover, and yeah, it looks garish and the font's really big, so you could read this in like a day. I did pick up this collection of Innsmouth-inspired stories. The main reason why I picked this up is it includes some kind of earlier unpublished version of a discarded draft of At the Shadows of Innsmouth. I'm really interested in what that is. And I was interested in the Richard A. Lupoff story and also the Basil Copper story. And who else is in here? Caitlin R. Kiernan, I like her, Ramsey Gamble, and Brian Lumley, The Taint. But I have that in a number of different publications there. I did pick up a video game based novel here, and that is based off of Nier. So this is the Yorha Boys. Nier Automata is one of the all-time great video games with a super, super interesting kind of post-apocalyptic, weird cyberpunk story that goes so hard. It is so good. I didn't really ever know that they made novels, and so I'm interested in reading this. It's it's actually from Square Enix Books. I don't even think I knew Square Enix was publishing books or if they published any other books. But, even if this is only half as good as the story in the video game, I think I'll be in for a good time because, man, I love Nier Automata. Such an interesting world and concept. Very, very cool. I also picked up another of the Pathfinder books. So whenever I can find the Pathfinder books in mass market size, I will pick those up. And so that is the Song of the Serpent from Hugh Matthews. And it looks like we have 4 more things to look at real quick. So I did pick up this really nice edition of Robert W. Chambers' The King in Yellow. My buddy had this and he showed it to me and I just fell in love with the size and the style. And it's just a super, super nice edition. And it only includes the core King in Yellow stories. So, The Repairer of Reputations is a classic, perhaps my favorite short story of all time. I absolutely love it. It's so creepy and it feels dangerous to read. It's weird. It's just, man, just fantastic. And this edition here is so nice. Who put this out? From Pushkin Press. So really, really nice edition, and it's not very expensive. I picked up this CHM magazine. I'm actually thinking of subscribing to this. So this was a special tribute to Thomas Ligotti. I'm looking forward to reading this, but I was really disappointed with how they shipped it. They just shipped it in a paper envelope and it got all bent up and destroyed. Actually, okay, I'm overreacting. It's not actually destroyed, but I would have appreciated if they had a backing, like a comic book backing, when they shipped this. So this is a whole bunch of stuff just kind of dedicated to Thomas Ligotti and CHM. I'm thinking about, so Cosmic Horror Monthly. Thinking about subscribing to this. They do have subscriptions. It's a little expensive, but it's boutique. And I'm not sure if everything that they publish is original, but I do want to investigate CHM a little more. A book, a newer horror novel. When was this published? Was it 2000s? 2022. So this is very new, especially for me. I have never read Ronald Motley before, and this is called Black Mouth. The reason I got this is I've heard a whole bunch of good things about Ronald Motley, and so I've never read them before, and I've heard that Black Mouth is a really good place to start. So this says, for nearly 2 decades, Jamie Warren has been running from darkness. He's haunted by a traumatic childhood and the guilt of having disappeared from his disabled brother's life. But then a series of unusual events reunites him with his estranged brother and their childhood friends, and none of them can deny the sense of fate that has seemingly drawn them back together. I think one of the reasons why I am attracted to this is it does kind of sound like a Stephen King style horror story dealing with kids and nostalgia and that kind of stuff. So looking forward to reading that. And then finally, this very weird old book from John Uri Lloyd. This is a nighttime edition, and this is called Ettedorfa. And this was, man, when was this written? It's so old. It's one of those really, really old works of fiction. First published, not fiction, but of like weird science fiction, weird fantasy. And so this was first published in 1895. And then an expanded edition was done in 1901. And then this edition is supposedly even more expanded, and that was done in 2019. But yeah, I don't know. This thing sounds pretty damn interesting. So first published in 1895, this work has survived as a cult book. To say this is an early science fiction narrative wouldn't be enough. To add that this is a fantastic story about an initiate's journey to the Earth's interior, a compendium of scientific hypothesis that goes from geology to metaphysics, an illustration of the miseries and hopes of men. That would at least be a better example to describe this singular work, inasmuch as this great narration contains multiple layers of interpretation. This is terrible text, all capitalized. I don't know why they did that. But yeah, in a forest of colossal fungi. I mean, just look at that. God, that looks great. Seated himself on a natural bench of stone. The struggling ray of sunlight is to be your last for years. So this guy gets like spirited away by this thing called the no man, the non-man. I don't know. It just sounds really kind of metaphysical and esoteric. And yeah, maybe this is going to be amazing. Maybe it's going to be a complete disaster. I don't know, but I had never heard of this before. So yeah, if you've ever read this kind of weird, anomalous book, let me know what you think of it, and let me know if I should prioritize this or maybe run away as fast as possible because it sounds pretty wild and interesting. But all right, guys, well, I hope you enjoyed this longer video, and I will try to do these more often coming in 2025. I hope you all have a great holiday season, and I hope you have a wonderful 2025 full of reading adventure. We will talk to you later. Bye-bye.